Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Alliance member meeting. This is Sarah Chang with Research America, and we are thrilled to have the two speakers that we have joining us today. Neither one needs much introduction, but before I get started, I wanted to turn your attention to your screen for a slide with additional instructions for muting and unmuting your lines. Right now, everyone's lines are muted. But if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box at any time, and we will save questions for the end. And for those of you dialing in by phone, we will try to open up the questions, the lines for questions later on, and that will be *6 to unmute your lines. Our first speaker today is Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Collins, we are so pleased to have you today, and that's quite the understatement to say. We know how busy you are, and so glad you can talk about NIH's COVID-19 response and the new Accelerating COVID Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines ACTIV Public-Private Partnership. So Dr. Collins, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, and hello, everybody. I'm glad I can join you, although unfortunately I can't stay on for more than about 15 minutes, but I did want to have a chance to speak to Research America's Alliance members. It is a time of incredible intensity for all of us who are working on COVID-19, and yet at a time of physical distancing, our social connections are even more important than ever, so I'm glad to be socially connected to all of you through this mechanism of this GoToWebinar gathering. Again, Research America is a tremendous supporter of NIH's mission to turn discovery into health, and times of medical crisis like right now put that mission to the test. But we are doing everything we can to respond to that. I'm talking to you from my home office, where I have essentially been every day for the last almost 6 weeks, barely getting a chance to go outside, I have to say. Working 14 hours a day and not really noticing weekends compared to weekdays, because this is all hands on deck to try to do what we can to bring the best and brightest science and the most dedicated efforts for implementation to the development of effective therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics for COVID-19. Let me say a little bit about that, and then I also want to say something about what's happening with the rest of research that doesn't affect this, and particularly the way it's had a huge impact on all of our grantee institutions and our trainees and everybody else who's part of our amazing engine for discovery, which has clearly taken a hit in the course of this pandemic. But first, about COVID-19. If you could put up my first slide, and I can't see it, but I'm assuming it will pop up at this point. I want to tell you about something called ACTIV, A-C-T-I-V. This is an unprecedented public-private partnership, only in existence now for about a month, which was brought together and inspired, I think, all of the leadership of both the public and the private sectors and various government agencies to get together to do some of the most critical things that need to happen right now. ACTIV stands for Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines. No less than 16 pharmaceutical companies have joined up at this moment and put some of their best and most senior scientists into the mix. We at NIH have done so with our leadership, from Tony Fauci to all of the other folks that are engaged in COVID-19. The FDA is deeply engaged in this, as well as is CDC, as is BARDA. And all of this enterprise is now broken down into a series of 4 working groups. One on preclinical therapeutics, figuring out ways to repurpose compounds that were developed for something else. Another on clinical therapeutics, developing master protocols and prioritizing what compounds should go next into those therapeutic trials. A third one on clinical trials capacity, trying to understand what are all the clinical trial networks that are funded both by NIH and by industry and by philanthropy that could be brought together so that when we have a clear indication of what trials need to be done, we make sure that we utilize that capacity. And fourthly, vaccines, where there are, of course, dozens of vaccine development programs, 4 or 5 of them that are particularly far along. We want to be sure that we support those in every way and also learn from them as we seek with remarkable intensity to try to get vaccines over the finish line, maybe even by the end of this calendar year, although that would be an incredible stretch and beyond anything that's ever been done before. So ACTIV aims to try to achieve that. The second slide, which I should have asked you to show, shows those 4 working groups and how their various challenges have been put in place. They are working pretty much every day for multiple hours, giving themselves tight deadlines. And this is going to be the place, I think, where a lot of the next set of therapeutic and vaccine trials get most closely watched over and supported. And it's really been amazing to see the way in which everybody has banded together without worrying about who gets the credit to do this. Normally, this kind of a partnership takes a year or two to set up. This was done in about a week and a half. Secondly, I want to tell you about another initiative that just got announced yesterday, which is about diagnostics. The next slide will show you what we're trying to do here to bring forward all kinds of amazingly creative ideas that are out there in academic labs and in small businesses to develop the next generation of point-of-care diagnostics to find out who is carrying this virus, and to do so in a fashion that makes it possible to quarantine such individuals immediately, not 3 days later, as well as to do quick testing on any contacts and do the same kind of way of avoiding the ongoing infection. This is the only way most people agree that we're going to avoid a second or a third wave of coronavirus, is to have this kind of broad testing at point of care available, and to have it available very soon. The Congress has provided substantial funds for this. We are organizing this in a fashion that the diagram shows, where there is this input function, where if you have a great idea, and I hope people looking at this will notice the solicitation, which just came out yesterday, and will put forward their great idea. And then you'll find yourself in a sort of a Shark Tank equivalent, but with very, very knowledgeable experts in technology, in engineering, in business issues, in commercialization and scale up, to try to help your idea find its way forward as rapidly as humanly possible, so that we could have, even by late summer or fall, an expansion in the number of testing capabilities that we're going to need in order to have people coming back out into the public space and doing so safely. So this one is called RADx, which stands for Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics for COVID-19. NIH working with BARDA on this and with FDA, and much of this being led by the director of National Institute of Bioimaging and Bioengineering, that's Bruce Tromberg. Very bold, very forward-looking, very high-tech, very much tapping into American ingenuity to see what we can do in this space. So there you have it, things that we're doing in diagnostics, in therapeutics, in vaccines. I hope you do get a sense about how we're trying to bring everybody together who's got ideas and things to contribute, so that no time gets wasted at a time where no time can afford to be wasted. We have this global pandemic that's severely affected our nation, caused the loss of lives, more than 60,000 now, and everything we can do to try to find a way forward to prevent more suffering and death is what we have to be doing at priority number one. Now, you might also then be interested, though, in knowing what's happened to the rest of NIH research, because, of course, we are the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world. Most of our money going out there to all the wonderful institutions across this country and some in other parts of the world, and many of you on the phone representing those institutions. And you know, as I do, that this has been a really tough time, that institutions, many of them medical centers, are hemorrhaging money because of what's happened in terms of the inability to bring on elective patients or in the inpatient or outpatient setting in order for their own safety to be maintained. And of course, research efforts that pretty much had to grind to a halt unless they were directly devoted to emergency patient care or to COVID-19 and the research that's necessary to pursue that. I'm sympathetic because our own NIH intramural campus has suffered the same fate. My own research lab at NIH is dark and has been so for the last 5.5 weeks. And it's heartbreaking, particularly with young trainees who are expecting this to be a moment of great opportunity and achievement, to be kept from doing the experiments that they thought they would be doing. And we all have to do everything we can to reach out and nurture and support those folks who are in a difficult circumstance, to put it mildly. Now, many of them have figured out ways to make the most of this circumstance, doing some data analysis, writing a paper that somehow hadn't quite happened, learning how to code in Python or R. And there's a lot of opportunities there that means the time need not be wasted. But still, it's really frustrating, and I understand that. And I'm particularly worried about our trainees and making sure we're doing everything we can to encourage them through this period. We will get through this, but it is still a tough time. I think we are at the point where we're beginning to try to figure out how to get some of that research slowly and carefully back on track, maintaining physical distancing, again, having the availability of testing to identify very quickly anybody who's infected and try to prevent further outbreaks. But we have to do that with great care, and you can't just skip over steps because they're inconvenient. Meanwhile, I think in terms of what people are asking NIH, we are trying to be as flexible as we've ever been in terms of dealing with the usual deadlines, allowing people to submit things late, allowing people to send in progress reports that basically say we didn't make much progress because we were all at home because of requirements for safety. And of course, anything else that people are interested in terms of extensions of programs that were supposed to end but didn't have a chance to finish, we are all about listening to concerns about that. Probably the best thing you can do if you're interested in a particular project and what you should do is to talk to our staff. They are totally available and ready to talk with you. And that's the program management people and the grants management people. They can help guide you through what's possible in this unusual circumstance. We're trying our very best to make this as limited in the pain that has to be suffered, because people are suffering enough just from having the forced retreat to homes instead of being in their usual physical workspace. So yeah, there is a website. If you just go to Google and look at grants, NIH coronavirus, it'll bring you to a site that is updated pretty much every day with new challenges and responses that people might want to look at in terms of how to negotiate through this difficult time. So that's pretty much the kind of things that I wanted to share with you. And again, I am apologetic for not being able to stay on longer. And I know Keith Yamamoto is my colleague over these many years and has been through a few challenges with me over these decades and is going to be available to talk to you more and to answer some questions. I just want to finish, though, with a bit of a message about hope, because I do recognize at a time like this, there is a lot of anxiety. People are feeling stressed. People are feeling just grief about what they have lost in terms of personal abilities to move about freely. And certainly many of us know people who haven't just lost in that way. They've lost loved ones to this terrible disorder that has taken too many lives already and still threatens our future. And yet we are the profession that aims to try to come up with answers. We do have a role to play here that we can feel is a calling. We have a mission that is a noble one that we can attach ourselves to and do everything we can to try to bring to bear on this crisis. So I often like to point out that while our initials are NIH and people consider that to be the National Institutes of Health, in a circumstance like this, we're also the National Institutes of Hope. And we need to spread that around, and we need to figure out how to make that into a reality. And we need to recognize that, yeah, while fear and anxiety and stress are all around us, that hope can be there too. And hope can be contagious. And to the extent that we are spreading that contagion of hope for the future and hope that science can bring us forward into a better place, then we're doing our job. So thank you, all of you who are doing that job day after day, despite our current circumstance. Want to work with you, want to be part of the same team, want to find these answers, want to bring our world into a better place. NIH and all of its supporters and allies and the Research America effort, we're in this together. We will get through this. Thanks very much, everybody. And again, my apologies for not being able to stay on longer. I'll turn this over to Keith.
Thank you, Francis. This is Mary. We so appreciate your time right now, and especially your leadership in probably one of the most challenging times ever for our nation, for the world, and at NIH. Be sure to call on us anytime.
I will, so Mary. Great to hear your
okay.
Yeah, great to hear your voice. Glad you were able to figure out the audio and the technology. And please keep up doing all the great things you're doing.
Oh, thanks. Thank
right.
you. But Francis, really, it's you. Okay. So wonderful to have had Dr. Collins with us and to hear about the exciting efforts that he's leading personally and his message of the importance of hope. That certainly resonates well with us at Research America. But I want to turn now to our wonderful guest, Dr. Keith Yamamoto, who is a board member of Research America. And Keith, as Professor Emeritus and Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy at UCSF, as well as the Director of the UCSF Precision Medicine Program, has been in the forefront, in the cauldron, if you will, about how the community, the research community, is responding to COVID-19. And Keith, we look forward to your remarks. So take it away. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Mary, and thanks to Research America for putting together this forum. I think that the opportunity and responsibility that we have to be able to communicate with your members and member organizations about what's going on, not only to pass along information, but to get feedback and advice is really important. So I really greatly appreciate this opportunity. And I also want to thank Francis for providing that message, what kinds of things are happening at the NIH level to pull together important research activity that is being carried out across the spectrum of stakeholder groups within the government, in industry and nonprofit organizations, and of course in our universities and medical centers, so to really combat this crisis. I'm going to separate my comments into two parts based on what you have asked me to discuss. One is I'll start by just of that damage that we and others are communicating to Congress as they craft the next supplemental package. And then I'll shift and talk a little bit about what's happened at UCSF in terms of responding to this crisis. On the research side, there's wonderful things happening on the clinical side as well, but I'm going to restrict my comments to a really remarkable response within the research community here to take on this problem in ways that really best utilize the incredible talent and technologies that are represented here. So let's go back and look at the impact first. You know, as with virtually every sector of our society, the pandemic has had a massive effect on the biomedical research enterprise across the nation, around the world, and has really stopped scientific investigations that are essential to understanding, treating, curing countless diseases, and those studies have just been stopped, abruptly terminated, labs closed in order to heed the shelter-in-place and stay-at-home guidelines that wisely were instituted. The San Francisco Bay Area was the first area in the nation to impose such orders. So the UCSF research enterprise has been essentially shut down. Doing that is itself difficult. It's not a matter of just turning out the lights and closing the doors. We have experimental animals that need to be maintained. We have cells growing in culture that need to be fed and tended every few days. So laboratories were given exceptions of being able to have 1 or 2 people come in, licensed to come in periodically to maintain stocks, check storage freezers and so forth, but otherwise moved our investigators and trainees out of the research buildings and told to stay at home. It's not known how long these restrictions are going to be in place, or the manner or rate at which they'll be relaxed. There's just many unknowns here, but one thing is certain, and that is that the recovery is going to be slow. It's going to take place over an extended period of time. And in some ways, it's just not clear that we'll ever return to business as usual. So this is not going to be just a matter of slowly reopening our research laboratories. This progression of science depends upon a huge roster of scientific meetings and seminar programs that bring together hundreds or to tens of thousands of researchers to share information, ideas, discoveries. At a place like UCSF, every day there are multiple seminars in which people have been brought in from other institutions around the world to talk about their latest progress and interact with our researchers to see if there are opportunities for synergies of cooperation that can move the knowledge faster. What's going to happen to programs like that? How long will it take to reconstruct experimental animal strains in sufficient numbers to begin to do research again? How to recruit participants to be research subjects in clinical trials or population studies? All of that has stopped. Many institutions, including UCSF, have imposed hiring freezes that are going to go on for over a year. How long will it take to fill vacant faculty slots or lab staff positions, or to reconstitute study teams or administrative staff to manage grant applications or grant funds, and to ensure that we are in compliance with various regulatory mandates? All of that has been terminated and is going to be a long, slow process when the hiring freeze comes off in mid-2021, what the current projected time of that, to allow this to begin to rebuild. So these and other disruptions, in fact, as Francis indicated, are perhaps most threatening for the next generation of scientists and practitioners, for our graduate students, for those who are doing postdoctoral work here, and for young faculty members, early stage investigators that are just getting their careers launched. We don't know what's going to happen, for example, with visa extensions for international trainees. There could be problems there. For graduate students, they're unable to complete their laboratory experiments, and therefore to complete research publications and dissertations. Many of them have planned and are actually quite far along in securing postdoctoral research positions elsewhere. Those are indefinitely delayed. And there's not funding sitting around for extended periods of training that would allow them to continue their work. Postdoctoral scientists, these are people really that are just at the edge of being able to begin their own independent careers. Well, they generally hold appointments at UCSF and elsewhere that have strict institutional term limits. One can't be a postdoc at UCSF and many other places for more than 5 years. And in any case, they lack sources of extended funding themselves. Their progression to independent careers as investigators is going to be impeded because the searches to fill positions, both in academia and in industry, have been suspended. So they can't even apply for the next place to go for their careers. And then our young faculty who are in place, early stage investigators, are expending their precious startup funds during the shutdown to support staff who are now at home. As Francis indicated, many of them are doing scholarly work outside the labs, writing papers and so forth, but they can't carry out the experiments that would build on scientific knowledge, that would advance their career aspirations. And so they're spending those funds, and there's not more funds to back it up. So all of those concerns and anxieties have to be placed against the backdrop of a very concerning report that just emerged from the Congressional Research Service, a bipartisan group that reports to Congress. that said that pointed out that as agencies and researchers have shifted their priorities to respond to the COVID pandemic, what the report says is the funding available for other topics may be reduced. So against the backdrop of not having enough resources for extending the work, the Congressional Research Service kind of lays down a warning that in fact that funding may actually be cut back. So it really means that it is now essential, even before we know the dimensions of the current crisis or the timing and duration of the predicted second wave, for example, that we really need to secure additional supplementary funding, and a group that I chair called the Coalition for Life Sciences has proposed to Congress a specific amount and a funding scheme that we think is fair and appropriate, and we can discuss that if people are interested. So let me leave that aside then and make just a few comments about what I've found to be truly inspiring. And that is that in the midst of all of this disruption and uncertainty and anxiety about what's going to happen in this crisis, the research community at UCSF and at many institutions across the nation has stepped up in remarkable ways to contribute to addressing the crisis. In some cases, the researchers have simply used their energy and dedication, largely the energy and dedication of our trainees, to do things that are needed. At UCSF, in collaboration with the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub here, we have set up kind of from a standing start, from an empty floor of a building, set up a COVID-19 diagnosis testing center. And we were able to get that CLIA approved within a week, kind of an astonishing result in itself. But then the question was, who was going to staff it? Who was going to make this thing run? And I can tell you that we put out a call to our graduate students and postdocs who are otherwise required to stay out of their laboratories, off of their research projects, and ask, is anybody willing to help to run this diagnosis facility? 200 students and postdocs volunteered, and enough to easily fill 8-hour shifts that allow this facility to operate 24/7. Another group, the science policy group at UCSF, stepped up to make hand sanitizer, and they have formulated and built several hundred gallons of hand sanitizer, distributed them into personal use size bottles together with an information pamphlet about COVID-19 and staying safe, and distributed those to prisons and homeless encampments around the San Francisco Bay Area, to residential hotels where the access to clean facilities, to even clean water, to cleanse themselves is compromised, and I think that's had a great impact. So that's in one case. Just use the energy of the people that can actually see a way for them to contribute. In other cases, research has pivoted, and very much as Francis has described, to really apply, in UCSF's case, a full range of our research capabilities, and across the full range of the ways that we work: computational, molecular, structural, cellular, organismal, in describing or analyzing pathways and mechanisms and outcomes of viral infection, spread, pathogenicity, in ways that could have impact on diagnosis and therapeutics and population health. And I'll just end by just describing one program in which, supported by a wonderful contribution from a philanthropist together, that was matched up with institutional funds, we made a grant offering to the UCSF researchers to propose studies that could have an impact, that could make a difference. And an amazing response. In less than a week, 125 proposals came forward representing some 75 laboratories at UCSF that really proposed amazing research. Really, just a couple of examples, a really wonderfully novel approach to identifying and repurposing tested and approved drugs already on the market, already FDA approved, that could interfere with infection and pathogenicity, a really creative way to be able to identify such candidate drugs that we wouldn't have to be making a new vaccine or inventing it and discovering a new drug. It's already there. Using UCSF's research expertise to develop really outstanding approaches to detecting and diagnosing infected people in ways that can really be delivered at the point of care. Understanding at the molecular level exactly the targets of infection and pathogenicity in ways that allow us to take a very targeted approach, either to developing synthetic antibodies, or to be able to find small molecules that will interfere with the process. So that work is underway. It was funded very rapidly, and exciting things are going on. So even in the midst of people not being able to do their own work, the research community here and elsewhere has stepped up in really wonderful ways. And I think that as we begin to find our way out of this and find our way through it, that long, slow process as I described, we can be assured and inspired that work is going on that is relevant to this problem. But we just have to keep in mind that the whole spectrum of investigations and research that is so essential to being able to understand mechanisms of disease in ways that we can prevent it, treat it, cure it, has been stopped. And we're going to need resources, help from Congress to be able to relaunch all of that work in the future. And that's true for many of the organizations and institutions that all of the member organizations of Research America represent. And so it's I'm hopeful as well with Francis that we can be able to convey that message clearly enough that those resources will be made available, and we can begin to reverse the damage that this crisis has generated. So let me stop there, Mary, and see if there are people that might have questions or comments.
Well, Keith, first of all, thank you so very much for a very cogent and honest, straightforward conversation about the threats to young scientists, young trainees as well right now. It's almost heartbreaking. I do hope that they're going to hang on, and that there will be the resources, I hope and trust, and we're working toward that goal just as you are. There will be the resources provided by the Congress, and there will be the policy adjustments that will allow everyone in the science community, but my heart especially goes out to the trainees and the generation that we want to thrive in the years ahead. Really, you've brought out so many important points. I wonder if you could comment a little bit about the sort of public reception to understanding more than maybe in the past, just how important research is, and the way, of course, public policymakers respond to their own constituents. But are you seeing in the San Francisco area, in the Bay Area, or other places that you touch, are you seeing more public receptivity to a stronger set of, stronger funding and stronger policy environment to allow science to thrive going forward?
It's a really great question and a really important point that you're making, Mary. And I think it's a bit too early to see if there is going to be, if this crisis will be seen as a wake-up call, if you will, in society amongst our policymakers, that we have been under-resourcing our public support funding for scientific research and technology in ways that we have to say contributed to the slow response that we've seen to this crisis. And I think time will tell. But what I can say is that it's apparent here in San Francisco that people are looking.
We lost you a little bit there, Keith.
To UCSF and other institutions in the Bay Area that are doing research for advice and for understanding. There's a great concern about things, and I think that these research institutions do represent trusted sources of information and advice, and the community is really looking to that. We have multiple webinars that are going on every day at UCSF. Several of them really focused on just providing information, answering questions, and those are routinely viewed by tens of thousands of people. So I think that that's growing, and if it can really move into a level of understanding that translates into a real alteration in policy, that would be a truly good outcome of this very serious and terrible situation.
That's very encouraging, actually. And I salute you, first of all, for providing those regular webinars and the many ways that you're reaching the community as a whole, as well as policymakers and the university community. So I think we might have some other questions. Terry, if you or Sarah have a question for Keith?
Sure thing, Mary. We have one question here that's come in. Early signs are pointing to potential long-term health impacts of COVID-19. Even many folks who are surviving the virus that are not returning to full health. Can Dr. Yamamoto address any of the research looking at those post-viral health outcomes, maybe specifically related to chronic illnesses like ME/CFS?
No, I'm not going to comment on the specific illnesses, but the point is a really important one, and that is that we understand actually very little about the detailed pathology that is generated by this virus. And so early on, everyone knows that it's a respiratory virus. There is focus on problems in the lung. And then as we have, unfortunately, a greater incidence of cases that have emerged and a longer time period in which people with the disease, carrying the disease, are struggling with it, we're finding that it's not just the lungs, that multiple organs are involved. There's big cardiovascular effects and effects in the liver and the digestive system. And so I think that this really means that we're going to see, as we begin to understand this better, the involvement, really in many elements of physiological function of the human that were unanticipated by the simple fact that the virus enters the respiratory system. And where it goes from there, we don't know, but it points out the importance of a broad spectrum approach to being able to understand this. You know that in one of the early supplementary packages, Congress gave funding to a subset of NIH research institutes that really would focus on infectious disease and on lung issues and lung health and things of that sort. And what we're learning is that that support needs to be far broader across many of the other topical spectra of the NIH's mandate for health and research, and that's really true across the board. That we don't know where the problems are going to come from, and we don't know where the solutions are going to come from. We don't know that some discovery made in a research institute organization that is focused on something that is entirely different from infectious disease may hold the key to being able to understand these diseases better and combat them. So that maintaining that spectrum is going to be really essential.
Mary, is this open for discussion?
It is. Please, is that Dr. Pardis? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
First, I want to thank you for putting this on, and also thank Keith and our NIH director for wonderful presentations. I wanted you to just know that in New York, the Genome Center, which houses about 15 research institutions, has launched, in addition, a special research program on COVID, doing research in laboratories to figure out what the causes are, how you can make changes. And so it's a wonderful example of private-public partnership with big philanthropy from private donors and a wonderful set of scientists who have also joined the fight on this. I think the point that Keith and Francis were making is that people in the research and clinical community are responding enormously to really get this damn thing under control. So just want to make sure it's known. It's happening all over the country in laboratories and great places through the United States and elsewhere. And our hope is that those efforts will bring us some real solutions.
Thank you so much for adding that very positive coda here, Dr. Pardis. And we are at the end of our time, but leaving this with a message of optimism and hope is exactly the right place that science should always be. Everybody, for what you're doing in your own way to defeat this pandemic, and then to assure that science has every chance to thrive going forward. And thank you for joining this call today. A special thanks to Dr. Collins and Dr. Yamamoto. I do hope you all, everyone, will think of joining us for our next Alliance member calls coming up next week on Wednesday, May 6th, 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll be hosting an Alliance member call with Dr. Peter Hotez, the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine and co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. And on Monday, May 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Dr. Lewis Sullivan, the former Secretary of HHS and Chairman of the Sullivan Alliance to Transform the Health Professions, will talk to us about health disparities during the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. So please keep an eye out for invitational emails with the registration links. And thanks again for being with us today. Bye for now.